What do you get when you mix a dark fantasy open world RPG with a studio that created a board game and was one of the biggest Kickstarter projects in 2018? Well, you get Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon. That's right, Awaken Realms, the creators of Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon, have created a new video game, Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon. Their Kickstarter campaign back in 2018 did so incredibly successful that they made a video game based directly on it. So today I'm gonna be talking about my experience with the game and ultimately answering the question that every single person wants to know. Is this worth my time and money? Well, let's not waste any more of your time and dive on into my thoughts about Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon. Also, so you know, this is a spoiler-free review. At least, I'm not really gonna be giving away any major story points. At least nothing that you're not gonna discover like 15 minutes into the game. Now, before we get too far into it, I do wanna point out that this game is in early access, which means it is not a complete product yet. Awaken Realms is estimating that their early access is going to last about 9 to 16 months. So what does that mean for you? That means that content is going to continually be pushed out over this time frame as they continue to polish up the game and continue to add content towards it. As it stands right now, there's only one chapter out called Horns of the South. It takes you onto one mainland island, and the content takes about 10 to 15 hours to get through. That being said, as it sits right now, the game is $29 US in early access, and they do plan on going up in price when the game is fully launched at the end of its early access. So what's it about? Well, as far as the story goes, King Arthur is long dead and all the myths and legends are falling. Humans living in Avalon are desperately trying to find new ways of life and things to believe in. The plague of the Red Death and the spreading weirdness, are not helping. Time is running out and multiple factions have their own plan for the future of the island. In this realm, slowly but surely sinking into chaos, you will find yourself imprisoned in a damp underground cell. At this point, you're nobody, but who knows? You might just be the one who brings a spark of change to this land of everlasting autumn. Now that's the story description that they give us, and I would say it seems pretty accurate from what I've experienced. When it comes to the story, for the first hour or so, I was not very drawn in. It felt like a very familiar feeling where you're waking up in a prison cell, not sure what's going on, which is funny because one of the first games that I thought of actually when I saw the previews for this was Skyrim, but really it actually turned out to be a lot more like Oblivion, which I'm a sucker for Oblivion. But it started off in like the same exact story way. You're in a prison, you try to get out, some stuff's going on. However, once I was a couple hours into the game, I did find myself beginning to get sucked in by the story. So it didn't take a whole lot of time, but I was definitely kind of thrown off in the beginning at how familiar the story seemed. There was another kind of weird aspect to me that there was like no cutscenes, and I understand that some of these games don't have cutscenes like that, but there was like really important story things that would happen, and all it was like a dialogue on the screen about what you missed. Like it wasn't even just like an in-game kind of cutscene, it was just like, read this to find out what just happened. Now, some of you guys might be okay with that. I thought it was a little weird, but I ended up getting past it. Now, just a reminder, this game is an open world experience, and you definitely feel that. You can kind of go around at your own pace. There's a lot of side quests that you can do. And I was actually a pretty big fan of the area. I thought a lot of it looked really scenic. There was some really cool scenes in it. When you look at the grand scheme of everything, it was very impressive looking. When you look at more of the like minor details, this isn't like a current gen experience. It's not like you're gonna get the most hyper realistic details. That's not the kind of game that it is. But some of the areas were actually really freaking cool, and the art style and just the scenery of it all definitely had me a little bit impressed. Now, because this is really only the first chapter in the game, you really only explore like one island area, so there wasn't really one area that felt a lot different from the others, so it was missing a little bit of variety there. But again, it is in early access. I'm sure there are more areas to come, and I would hope that those would be in different kind of climates, have a different kind of feel to them, even different kind of flora and fauna and trees and all of that kind of stuff. But I was very surprised at how much I really appreciated like sunrises and sunsets in this game. The lighting effects were pretty good. I'll give them that. Now let's talk about a few of the in-game mechanics like trading, crafting, and cooking. I wasn't really expecting like the first dialogue in the game to give me a one-up on like crafting or cooking or smithing. And so naturally I started talking about food, and apparently that just made me like a chef in the game. Now you can diversify from that, but I think initially I got some extra recipes for cooking, and actually cooking came in very, very handy. And I would say this about crafting and cooking. There are like a ton of resources to find throughout this game. actually to a point where it was a little bit overwhelming. I was looking at my inventory at like any given time, and I had so many items in there that I was like, I don't know what I should get rid of, what I shouldn't get rid of. But as you started doing some of the cooking, you could put some different things together, try crafting it, see if it actually came up with a recipe or not. So there was a little bit of experimentation in there, and I really did actually enjoy that aspect. I would say the most of what I was trying to accomplish was just giving myself some more HP. So I was trying to figure out which recipes I could create that were gonna give me the most HP for the most common resources that I could find. But I'll be honest, there's a stat in the game that gives you like increased loot where you can find more things that I never put a point into, and I still felt like I was finding ingredients everywhere. The same thing goes for alchemy. You can do alchemy in this game, create potions that are going to give you more mana, more health, give you some buffs so that you have a 1-up in combat. I actually found myself relying more on the food aspect than on the potion aspect, but I felt like I was just trying to kind of lean into the fact that I said I was like into cooking at the beginning. And speaking of taking things that are gonna give you a 1-up in combat, let's talk about that aspect of this game. Hey, if you found this video to be helpful so far, make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, because if you don't, then Winston doesn't get to eat, and that sucks. So do it for him. Honestly, combat was probably the most lackluster part of Tainted Grail. I don't want to necessarily say that it was bad or that I didn't enjoy it at all, but it felt very stale. I mean, you get like a one-handed ability, a two-handed ability, you can get a shield, you can get some basic spells, you can kind of dual wield those things. But at the end of the day, it was still pretty much light attack, heavy attack, maybe throw a spell out there. And honestly, the spell animations were not all that impressive. Again, I'm not one that has to be like wowed by graphics or wowed by animations, but they definitely just seemed kind of weird when you throw out something like a fireball and it just kind of glows red a little bit. Honestly, this is one of the things I hope they get the most changes to throughout the early access, because the story itself is pretty good. The story itself was really engaging. The world was pretty fun to discover. But again, the word that I just kept thinking of when I was thinking about the combat in this game was lackluster, which is the word that like all of my exes have given me. Anyway, but what would combat be without enemies? And I would say that there was a pretty decent amount of enemy diversity in it, at least when it came to the looks and the sizes of the enemies that I fought. There's definitely some really cool designed enemies in the game. However, at the end of the day, really the only difference with the enemies were their speed of attacks, and then they had an up close and a range attack. There was not a lot of diversity, but I really want to cut some slack because the game is in early access. I know they're going to continue to add things to it. My dog is like over here sighing as if he freaking pays taxes. One of the other things that I found too is that the enemies were not very intelligent. That didn't mean that they weren't hard to fight sometimes, but like I would come up to like an abandoned castle area and there's just like 4 dudes stagnantly just like standing there, all facing one direction. It just made for some interesting exploration. Now, here's the part where I talk about some minor bugs and details and just kind of inconveniences of things that don't necessarily break the game completely, but definitely was an interesting experience. One thing I noticed as I was talking to some of the NPCs, especially when I'm in like dungeons and high stress environments, some of the music was playing very loudly over the dialogue for the NPCs. Like, I know I'm an old man when it comes to my hearing, but there was definitely some parts where I was like, I feel like the music needs turned down a little bit. Now, at the same time, I know I can go into my own settings and actually change that, but it was just a weird thing that I noticed because I don't usually pick up on stuff like that. There's definitely some interesting bugs too when it came to things like character models. You know, you kill an enemy and suddenly they're just T-posing. Or I'm talking to a guy who's holding a bow and he's just like moving his hands and the bow's just like going through his neck. That kind of stuff seemed to happen actually pretty frequently. In about my 11 hours of playing the game did crash twice. However, I was assured that the version that I played was still somewhat of a beta, and so that some of those crashes might have been fixed for the early access. I was also trying to do one of the main quests in the game, and I kept falling through the map like anytime I would try to do it. Eventually I got it to work, but like it was like I could predict exactly when I was gonna fall through the map, even if I was on different points of the map. And there was some minor bugs where suddenly I was like sliding across the floor and I couldn't help it, so I just had to save and reload the game. And that worked fine. All the bugs really fixed out pretty quickly. Quick save and then load brought me back into it, but it's definitely not a fully polished game, and they're very transparent about that if you look at things like the Steam store. Just a big fat reminder that this game is still in early access. So what are my actual thoughts? Should you buy the game? Should you not buy the game? Should you play the game? Should you wait? as of right now, in its current state, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. I think this game has a lot of promise, especially if they can get rid of some of these bugs. If you would have asked me in the first couple hours of the game, I was kind of like, maybe more like a 6. But as I started getting into it, I was more of like a 7 to 7.5. Some of the current bugs probably took it back down to a 7 for me. However, I definitely think that this would be worth re-reviewing when the game reaches a full launch, or even when it's like halfway through early access. If you're the kind of person that graphics aren't like the only thing and you just want some good story and a pretty decent open world experience, especially in like a dark fantasy type deal, I would say this game is probably worth you picking it up now, especially because it'll be full price when it's out of early access. Let me know in the comments below, are you excited to try Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon? If you've already played it, what are your thoughts on the game? Do you think a 7 out of 10 is fairly accurate for you as well? Or am I just completely off right now? Here at the Lumberzak Gaming channel, we are all about building a positive gaming space where gamers just come together, share their passion, talk about gamings, uplift each other, you know? If that sounds like something that you want to be a part of, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Make sure to like this video too. I also appreciate it. If you want some more details on Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon, go ahead and check out this video over here, and I'll see you in the next one.